but I am wondering what steps I can take to assure that my mental health can take this strain. That is such a good question, Susan, and it is one that I have wrestled with in the past. So many of you know I wrote this first book in the series, and this is my memoir about growing up as a missionary kid. For those of you who don't know, I actually worked on this book I probably had the idea to write it when I was going through the experiences as a teenager, moving and wrestling with grief and how to fit in. And then after college, I picked up the book idea and I was ready to write. So I started, and what happened is it started triggering so many feelings. Like I would literally sit down to write, and then I'd write a little bit, and the next thing I know, I'd be like sobbing over my keyboard, sobbing on the floor because it was stirring up all this grief, all this pain from the past. So I am a huge believer in counseling and getting help. So I had been in counseling before to process through some childhood stuff, but working on this book like sent me back to the counselor's office. And so I put the book on pause and spent, I think, about a year working through the grief, realizing, hey, I really struggle with codependency, which is basically people pleasing to the extreme and not giving myself a voice, giving myself space. So did that. The book was set aside, and then it wasn't until later that I picked it back up. And as I was writing, I stayed like with a different counselor at that point, but I kept going to counseling as I was doing the book. And for my book, actually, this first one especially, which is the most painful part of my story, I actually had a friend who helped me. So I literally brain dumped this first book down, and then my friend came in and formatted it, edited it, so that I just had to go back and make sure it was right, without having to do a ton of heavy lifting on the editing. So that is kind of how I got support, how I processed through writing this first part of the memoir. And kind of just full transparency, even now as I write, and part of it might just be, it's hard to tell where it's from, but in general, like personality wise, I feel things really deeply. I have, all that trauma from my childhood. So for me, like in my current season, what keeps me healthy is that I go and see my counselor once a month, maybe twice a month if there's a lot going on. But that gives me the space to continue processing, continue healing, continue growing. And then I also meet with my spiritual director, Nancy Booth. And some of you know her. We run the Right With Us retreats together. And spiritual direction is not counseling, but what it is it's basically setting aside time to read God's word, to sit in his presence, to really listen to what he has to say. And so between my counseling sessions each month and then my spiritual direction session once a month, those two things currently are really helping me stay grounded and healthy, to keep moving forward. So, Susan, kind of coming back to your question, I think it's extremely insightful that you are noticing what's being stirred up in your heart and even the rawness that you're experiencing. So, I would encourage you, whether that means going to a counselor, reaching out to friends, spiritual, like whatever that looks like for you, definitely aim to put some support in place to process through that. And then also being gentle with yourself as you're writing. I know for me, something that helped me process my grief when it felt so overwhelming was to give myself small containers of time to really feel the grief and remember, and then to also give myself permission. Like I would literally set a timer for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And so during that time, I would feel the grief, I'd be crying, I'd, snot, the whole thing. And then when the timer went, I gave myself permission to kind of put it away, box it back up, which can be an unhealthy coping mechanism, but it's also my counselor encouraged me, like, it's okay to like put it away and not think about it for a while, so that it's not affecting each moment of your life. So Susan, let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts, what you think your next action step is. I'm here. We're here to continue cheering you on. Writing a memoir about a painful past is not for the faint of heart, and it can be very difficult. So I see you, and I'm cheering.